Welcome, welcome once again to another edition of Quoth the Raven, Lewis Bright Raven. Happy Veterans Day to all of our soldiers and veterans who have served our country and their families who have also sacrificed for our freedoms. We appreciate it. And tonight's topic is going to be favorite directors. My co-host we have right next usually is with us, Mr. John Norris.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you're doing well.
Well, before we get into our topic of the evening, I guess we should mention the sad news of the departure of Mr. Kevin Conroy, also known as the voice of Batman for Batman the Animated Series, a generational voice actor in that regard. For many people, he is the definitive Batman.
Yep.
We're going to talk more about him in a future episode because I think there's a lot more to him than just being Batman. But we haven't had a chance to do the research and do a proper presentation, but we will do that hopefully next week or a week out. Well, let's see what we got here. You want to do it next week, John?
Sure, we can do it next week.
Oh, okay. So we'll probably talk about it more at length next week, but I don't know. It was unexpected. I don't think anybody publicly knew he was ill.
I sure didn't.
People think that 66 is young. I don't know. Different people have different life experiences and stuff that affects our age and how we age and stuff. So who knows? But we'll find out more about it as time progresses over the next week, and then we'll go at length about the man, his career, and his significance to not just the history of Batman, but like I said, he's more than just that as an actor. So we'll go into a more in-depth conversation then. Okay, this week is our favorite directors. As you can see behind John, he has his movie collection behind him on the wall there, and that's pretty much how he selected his.
Yep.
I just had a short list in my mind, and I was trying to think of some people that maybe weren't always the ones you think of, but we hopefully we come up with a few that are favorites of yours as well, and we'll see. Let's let John start, though. His first choice is Don Bluth.
Yes. Who fortunately is still with us. Born in 1937, starting out as an assistant to Disney's John Lounsbury. John Lounsbury was one of Disney's famed 9 Old Men. Bluth first worked on Sleeping Beauty, but left 2 years before its release. He left to do missionary work for a decade for the Church of Latter-day Saints, but eventually found his way back into animation, this time for Filmation in 1967. There he worked on animated shows such as The Archie Show and Sabrina the Teenage Witch. In 1971, he would return to Disney as an animation trainee. His first official project was Robin Hood, in which he animated sequences of Robin Hood stealing gold from Prince John, rescuing a rabbit infant, and romancing Maid Marian near a waterfall. And by the way, Robin Hood is just turned 49 years old, I just found out. It premiered 2 years before I was born, which kind of makes me feel old now, but I digress. For Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2, he animated Rabbit alongside John Lounsbury, his mentor. He would rise through the ranks to animation director on The Rescuers and Pete's Dragon, becoming one of the top 10 animators in all of Disney at the time.
But alongside the other 9 old men.
I'm sorry?
Alongside the 9 old men.
Yes.
He was
But the truth was, he was bored at Disney, often because he was telling other people's stories and not what he wanted to do. This was why he'd left and went off to do missionary work years earlier, and it seems like he was at a crossroads. So he definitely felt that the quality at Disney just wasn't there anymore. And of course, by the time he came back, Walt Disney had passed away, and it's what they now refer to as the dark ages of Disney. Don't know if I really agree with that. They were definitely lean years, though.
Mm-hmm.
But and he just, any ideas he would have about, how to make better quality films just fell on deaf ears. So in 1979, on his 42nd birthday, he founded Don Bluth Animation Studios with fellow Disney people John Pomeroy and Gary Goldman. So he wanted to do his own projects while he also did work at Disney. And his first production was a short entitled Banjo the Woodpile Cat, which is a rare find even after its DVD release in 2014. But I will say, if you can find it, it's well worth watching. It's a charming short. But the success of this film at the time caught the attention of Hollywood and led to him doing the animated sequence for the live-action film Xanadu. But tensions between Bluth and Disney were starting to build. Bluth would hire 160 animators and produce the film The Secret of NIMH. This was the first animated film production that offered the animators a profit-sharing contract in the animation industry. Unfortunately, while a critical success, financially the film flopped, and there are some rumors that the reason it flopped was Disney threatened theaters not to carry or market the release, but nothing substantial has ever been brought forward to prove this. Something else about that I heard was the film was distributed by United Artists that just had a huge flop with Heaven's Gate, and subsequently they were bought out by MGM, and apparently, as sometimes happens, the new regime isn't exactly thrilled with what the old regime was interested in.
Right.
And they really didn't.
They buried it. They buried it too. Yeah.
It wasn't well marketed, unfortunately.
Okay, keep on. You want me to go on, or do you want to keep reading?
I'll keep reading. Bluth's company was in dire straits and headed into bankruptcy as a result while the famous video game Dragon's Lair and its sci-fi follow-up Space Ace did keep the company afloat for a few more years. The company filed for bankruptcy in 1985, in part because even though there were animated series, they weren't done by Bluth. Or his animators, but by Ruby Spears Productions under a license, which is a big part of why those animated series flopped on TV. An adaptation of Beauty and the Beast was also planned in 1984, but that project was canceled by Columbia Pictures upon discovering that Walt Disney Pictures had their plans for their own adaptation. And keep in mind that Disney's Beauty and the Beast came out in 1991, 7 years later, which is Disney effing with some more.
That's my opinion, anyway. I just don't. There was no reason, but I think that Disney has a lot of power in the film industry. The Disney name Um, and the people that run that company are very cutthroat, and they will do things like this. So, it's very probable that they told Columbia not to do it, or else. And when you think about how much power Disney has in distribution, in channel ownership, because they own ABC, they own other networks as well, that can affect how other film companies and television companies get distributed nationally. So that's probably more why that film was canceled by Columbia.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In 1985, Bluth paired up with Morris Sullivan, and the Sullivan Bluth Studios was launched. This led to a 1986 deal with Steven Spielberg, who we'll get to in a little while, for an American Tail, which at that time became the biggest selling non-Disney animated feature film released, and finally Bluth was getting recognized. Their second collaboration, The Land Before Time, did even better in theaters and found a successful life on home video. Bluth ended his working relationship with Spielberg before his next film, All Dogs Go to Heaven, which wasn't as successful, likely due to not having Spielberg's name and marketing influence. But there's something else about that I'll get to in a moment. But we can continue for now.
Okay.
Bluth would go through a rough period in the 1990s with critical and box office bombs such as Rockadoodle and Thumbelina before pairing up with Fox with the smash hit Anastasia, which scored 140 million plus at the box office and effectively made Fox Animation a legit competitor to Disney, the first animation company to do so in theatrical release. Unfortunately, it also marked Bluth's last directed film in Titan AE, which bombed spectacularly, resulting in Fox actually closing down the studio until The Simpsons movie in 2007 as a result. Bluth's legacy.
Before we go with the legacy, I want you to talk about All Dogs Go to Heaven.
Okay, so I think people think of Disney nowadays as, nowadays Disney is this, behemoth, but Disney wasn't always on top, like we just said. They had their lean years, which resulted in Bluth leaving, and a lot of people, there's a term, the Disney Renaissance, which a lot of people say the Disney Renaissance began with like The Little Mermaid or something, but really, I think you have to go back to 1986, because what happened in 1986, Disney had just done The Black Cauldron, which was a major financial flop. And then in 86, they released The Great Mouse Detective. And while it wasn't a smashing success, it did do respectable business, and it made a small profit, which after The Black Cauldron, was definitely a step in the right direction. But then a few months later, Bluth and Spielberg come out with An American Tail. And all of a sudden you have an animated film that, is making, live action successful amounts of money. And which of course got everybody's heads turning. And I've read like when American Tail,
you really did your research.
when American Tail beat out The Great Mouse Detective, like I've heard it said that like that was literally the moment when Jeffrey Katzenberg at Disney said, we've got to get back on top. And it's like that really is what sparked the fuse for the Disney Renaissance. And then a couple of years later, The Land Before Time and Disney's Oliver and Company were actually released on the same day.
Right.
And they fought it out for weeks at the box office, and both films did well. But
how many people remember Oliver and Company versus The Land Before Time?
I don't know.
Because actually I don't remember Oliver and Company even being released at that time. That's why I asked that.
It was well, and part of the problem was Oliver and Company didn't receive a video release until the 90s when it was re-released for whatever reason, I don't know.
Right.
But then Disney did Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was a spectacular success. And then, of course, that was Disney, Spielberg, and Zemeckis did Roger Rabbit. They released it under their Touchstone Pictures division.
Okay.
But then by the time All Dogs Go to Heaven came about, Disney had The Little Mermaid. And now Disney was getting back on top again.
Okay. Interesting. No, I just didn't realize that Disney had anything to do with Roger Rabbit. That's all.
Okay. Oh yeah.
All right. See, this is why John's on the show, because this is his wheelhouse, his favorite stuff. So, anyway, now we can talk about Bluth's Legacy now.
So Bluth's Legacy is a mixed one. In many ways, because of the way Disney allegedly blocked him from projects and threatened theaters with pulling their films from theaters if they showed Bluth's films. There's a huge list of unproduced works that, had they been produced and marketed correctly, could have made Bluth the most successful animation director in the history of mankind, including the
aforementioned Beauty and the
Beast, and animated adaptation of The Velveteen Rabbit, an adaptation of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and a Beatles animated film that got nixed when the Beatles wouldn't sign off for the use of their likeness. Had that film been made, it would have predated Pixar's Toy Story by 7 to 8 years, and had it been a hit, would have completely changed the landscape of computer animation and filmmaking. The Beatles wouldn't sign off, mostly because the film was based off a pitch to Bluth by Michael Jackson, who had outbid Paul McCartney on the Beatles catalog and took all the rights to their songs. It's no secret, like we've said, that he's had a roller coaster of a career with extreme highs and lows. But for me, like, when he's at his best, like you just can't be beat. And what we've gotten from him, particularly, Secret of NIMH, American Tail, Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and Titan AE, those are some of the best. And again, he came along, and Spielberg to a degree, and challenged Disney at a time when nobody was challenging Disney,
right.
Up to then, you had Hanna-Barbera and you had like Ralph.
Hanna-Barbera never really did theatrical though.
They did a couple, but yes, but they did mostly TV stuff. But there was really, Disney really had no competition until An American Tail came along.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do wonder, had that not happened, would we have had the Disney Renaissance in the first place?
Probably not, because once Walt died, the new ownership of that era, or the new leadership of Disney at that era, was, first off, they were not really into the animation side of things, because they were more into the live action films. There was a lot of success in live action in the 70s and late 60s for Disney, and animation was expensive to them, and they didn't want to have all those people to do animation, which is really funny because now almost everything is animation. Even live action has so much computer generated animators in everything now that you've got just as many animator workers in a live action film as you do an animated film. So it's very interesting. What would have happened though is Amblin Entertainment, which was Spielberg's deal with Zemeckis and others, would have come up with it in the mid '80s, with or without Bluth. But Bluth was someone that they trusted, who had the traditional background with Disney. And I think that's where that connection was made.
Yeah, and An American Tail is what got Spielberg into animation. And actually, the story I heard going back to The Secret of NIMH, is well, I got to pause here and show off for a minute.
Okay.
And we've talked about The Secret of NIMH on the show before.
Yes.
But I have to. This is how much, for those who missed that show, this is how much of a fan of this movie I am. I not only have the movie on DVD, but an original theatrical one-sheet poster, and I have the soundtrack on both CD and vinyl.
Okay. And you have more.
No, that's it.
No, you got one more item. What did you get from Shell Suite?
Oh yes, I forgot to pull that out. Hold on.
As you can see, this is one of his favorite things in the world. But
I can't get to it right now.
Okay, that's all right. But we have a friend here in Columbia who goes by Shell Suite, and she's an artist. Kristen Keeley is her real name. She's Shell Suite because she's a huge Turtles gal, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and she did this beautiful poster print for Miss Frisbee and Rats and M. So he has one of those as well.
But anyway, so the music for The Secret of NIMH was written by the legendary composer Jerry Goldsmith, and if you just like look him up on IMDb, he's like one of the most prolific composers ever. And the same year he scored The Secret of NIMH, he also scored Poltergeist, which was written and produced by Spielberg. And it was he who introduced Spielberg to The Secret of NIMH, and that's how Spielberg became interested in Don Bluth, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Norris says, "Hey, John, hope you're feeling better, and nice collectibles."
Thank you, and yes, I am.
Yeah, he is feeling better. Okay. Alrighty. Your favorite film, obviously, Don Bluth film, is obviously Secret of NIMH.
Yes.
And I totally understand that, and I think it is one of his best films, if not his very best film. I did not want to just automatically agree with you, though. So I had to think about it. And, like you say, a lot of stuff, he created such an interesting dynamic working with Spielberg. But I wanted to go with Titan AE, even though it was a theatrical financial flop, because first off, I like the science fiction storyline. It's something that he never really got to really delve into. He wanted to do more with it in that genre before with Space Ace and make a whole theatrical film that didn't get made. If you guys don't know, he's actually the voice of Worf in the Space Ace. He's the villain. So, yeah. Anyway, so there was that, and the animation quality of starting with the computer generated work that was done in that film was kind of like a leap forward in the computer animation type stuff that came in later. It was an actual benchmark film, so that's why I went ahead and went with Titan AE in 2000. So John's favorite, of course, is Secret of NIMH, and mine is Titan AE. And of course, we recommend American Tail, Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and Anastasia as well. Okay, our next director is Alfred Hitchcock. August 13th, 1899 to April 29th, 1980. We lost him, unfortunately. And of course, he's like, is it that obvious that I am your favorite director, Mr. White Raven? But his career spans 6 decades. He directed over 50 feature films, many of which are still widely watched and regarded as required viewing and studying for filmmaking. And he was a brilliant filmmaker, but also a television icon with his Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV series. Receiving the moniker The Master of Suspense, his films garnered 46 Academy Award nominations, including 6 wins, although he never won the award for Best Director despite 5 nominations, which I think is a tragedy and a crime. But that's just my opinion. A British director, originally from Leytonstone, Essex, England, Hitchcock was one of Britain's most influential directors of the 20th century, even before he came over to the United States. He directed the first British talkie film, Blackmail, in 1929, and developed the entire thriller genre 2 years before that with the film The Lodger Story of London Fog from 1927. His thrillers The 39 Steps from 1935 and A Lady Vanishes from 1938 are ranked among the greatest British films of the 20th century. Hitchcock's mastery of not only suspenseful storytelling and pacing of film, but his subtle, dry British humor with a mastery of deadpan delivery gave American audiences not only some of the best films in the history of cinema, but gave his films an air of sophistication that made audiences feel like they were going to see an event without the excess hype of competing filmmakers such as William Castle, which we've talked about his film The Tingler in the past from 1959, or the bombastic nature that would later become so commonplace in Hollywood cinema. Cinematically, Hitchcock's style and use of editing and camera movement to mimic a person's gaze, thereby turning viewers into a sort of voyeur after a fashion, and framing his shots to maximize anxiety and fear became a staple for horror filmmakers afterwards, including Tobe Hooper in Poltergeist from 1982, William Friedkin in The Exorcist in 1973, and of course, literally thousands of others. Of course, in 2012, his psychological thriller Vertigo actually displaced Orson Welles' Citizen Kane from 1941 as the British Film Institute's greatest film ever made. Which, when you have something like that happen, that's pretty shocking in a way. Because Kane was such a historically significant film. To have this film to place that is pretty wild. There's really too many films to list, but let's go with the big 4 and a couple more. Rebecca and Shadow of a Doubt are 2 of his favorite films of Alfred's. And then the big 4 are Rear Window, Vertigo, North by Northwest, and of course Psycho. My favorite happens to be Rear Window. Grace Kelly is just so, I don't know. He does a really job of having her do something with the subtlety of her performance, but still have it be countering the anxiety that continues to grow in Jimmy Stewart's performance. So it's just really excellent film there. And of course, John didn't tell me before the show, but what is your favorite of these?
And it was tough choosing between Vertigo and Psycho because I love them both. I think Vertigo's just a hypnotic film. But I had to give it to Psycho because it's the first Hitchcock film I ever saw, and it's one of those films. It does not matter how many times I see it. Like I'm sucked in by it every single time because it's just so well made.
Mm-hmm. Okay. North says that Hitchcock is his second favorite actor after Akira Kurosawa. Good choice of Akira Kurosawa. We're not really doing favorites here. We're doing them in alphabetical order, but Hitchcock is my favorite overall, I think. But I certainly Kurosawa is certainly a respectable choice as well. He also said he loves Nim and he owns it and would love a cell. So from the film, I've actually seen those on auction a lot lately at Heritage Auctions. So not that they're sponsoring a show, but go check out Heritage Auctions and sign up for it. You might find something on the weekly animation and comics fronts with them. Okay, our next one is Stanley Kubrick. Your turn.
All right. So July 1928 to March 1999, considered by many to be one of the greatest filmmakers in history, Kubrick's career focused often on making adaptation films from novels. In a career spanning over 40 years, his first major film was The Killing in 1956 for United Artists. He made 16 major theatrical films as a director and wrote half of those, as well as writing screenplays for other films. His films grossed over $395 million combined worldwide. Keep in mind, most of his films were in the 1960s and 1970s, where the ticket sales were a fraction of what they cost today. Adjusted for inflation, his box office would total $1.87 billion. Kubrick is also a heralded cinematographer, and his innovations in cinematography, particularly in use of special effects, as in 2001, where he used both slit scan photography and front screen projection, which won Kubrick his only Oscar in the category of special effects. He also popularized the one-point perspective technique, where everything in the scene is centered to a fixed vanishing point.
Okay, hold on a second. North wants to comment about Hitchcock real quick. Psycho is the best slasher film. Unfortunately, modern fans prefer Mike Myers type with no motivation. First off, Psycho is not really a slasher film. It is a psychological terror film. I would say, because there's more plot to the film, even though it's a very straightforward and sort of simplistic plot. There's more going on with the characters than what goes on in a lot of these modern films. A lot of the modern films is just there's no explanation of the guy is just a killer, and it's how many different people can he kill? There's really no story to them as much. Whereas I think Psycho, given the plot of the storyline, is a much more cerebral film than what modern stuff is. Pop culture is in the room. Good evening. He says, hello, Raven John and Midnight. And I don't know. Oh, yeah, he is. Yeah, Midnight's here. He's just sleeping over here underneath the table. So, North says Kubrick finishes his top three like Hitchcock and Kurosawa, a true perfectionist. So, there you go. But let's continue with Kubrick, and let's go on to the next page here. Okay.
He also used a specially adapted high-speed 0.7 Zeiss camera lens, originally developed for NASA to shoot numerous scenes lit only with candlelight for his film Barry Lyndon, which revolutionized the field. Too bad directors don't watch this film and go back to this technique, as so many films and TV shows today are filmed way too dark and you can't see squat.
Well, let's face it, it's the truth, right? He actually has a frame 0.07. The f/0.07 is like 0.7 frames per shot or something like it. It helps absorb what light is there in the dark, basically, type thing. Notable Stanley Kubrick films, of course, are 2001: The Space Odyssey, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Love to Learn to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, Barry Lyndon, Spartacus, and The Clockwork Orange. We both picked 2001: A Space Odyssey, but really, you could have picked any of these films other than maybe Spartacus and been right up there and understood why that's a pick. Not that Spartacus was a bad film, it was a good film, but I'm just talking about in terms of each one of those films had a very significant cinematic historical component that changed and revolutionized the film industry. Would you not agree with me on that?
Yes.
So I think that's I think Full Metal Jacket's probably the least appreciated because of Platoon, which came out a few months before it or something like that.
Something like that.
But why did you pick 2001?
I picked 2000. I picked 2001. And again, it is the first Kubrick film I ever saw. I can't remember. I saw it. I think I saw it on television on Turner Classic Movies. And it's like Kubrick's films. I found like I get more out of them each time I watch them.
Okay.
And this was certainly the case with 2001, and it's like I remember the first time I saw it, like I had no idea like what is this I'm watching, but I just knew it was something I hadn't seen before. Okay. And I've seen it several times. I finally got to see it in IMAX because like this is a movie that you really haven't seen it until you've seen it on the big screen, because it was designed to be seen on the big screen. They released it in IMAX a couple of years ago. I finally got to see it. Like one of my bucket list items would be to see this movie in its original 70 millimeter projection. Like I think that would just be the coolest thing. And
okay, Pop and North are like Dr. Strangelove or Strangelove is a classic, and it is, and it's such a wonderfully weird movie in its own way, but it's got such a thematic structure to it that not only is it a product of its era because of what was going on in the world at the time with the threat of nuclear holocaust, but I'm trying to think of the parallel of power, military power and sexuality and other things that was going on in that film. It was really quite the ride, and not just because he's riding the rocket at the end of the film but it's quite it's quite an interesting film. But I picked 2001 pretty much for the fact that I was such a fan of Clark's 2001 Space Odyssey, the book to begin with. So, it was obviously it's not a complete adaptation to what Clark actually wrote in the book, but it is probably one of the best cinematic adaptations of science fiction that we saw, especially in its era. And I kind of wish that Kubrick had been able to go back and do adaptations of the rest of the series with Clark's novels. He didn't get to do those, though, unfortunately. So I think it would have been interesting to see what Kubrick would have done and how he would have linked them cinematically in cinematography. I think that would have been interesting to see. But unfortunately, that just didn't happen. The Shining was actually quite cool. Kubrick's film was very cool. Of course, King didn't like it for various reasons. I'm not really. King was being a prima donna at that time, I think. I don't know. He really did a nice job with it. I would not have cast Shelley Duvall in the role. I do not like Shelley Duvall in that film. But I'm not a big fan of her as an actress. I think it has more to do with her as an actress rather than her performance. And really, if you don't have Jack Nicholson, that film doesn't work. I hate to say. Nicholson really carries the movie. Don't get me wrong. There's some brilliant visualization going on, and I'm not knocking Kubrick directorially or in terms of his adaptation. I just think that without Nicholson to carry that film, I don't think it would have gone anywhere.
But to Duvall's credit, at least from what I've heard, she really paid her dues on that film.
Yeah, she did. She did. So, how many times did she have to fall down the stairs? Because I know she fell downstairs and then Nicholson fell downstairs. I don't know. It's a big mess there. But yeah. All right. Let's go on to our next one. Since John brought up Don Bluth, and he did not really actually come into my mind when we were talking about this, I said, oh, crap. I got to come up with someone that's comparable to Don. How do I do this? And this is what I came up with. Hayao Miyazaki.
Good choice.
January 4th, born January 5th, 1941, still with us. It made me think of two people. We had to either go with Katsuhiro Otomo for Akira and other films that he did, or with Miyazaki. And in terms of cultural significance, range and diversification of content, while remaining true to his core themes and message, as a director, I have to go with Miyazaki because Otomo doesn't have as diverse of a range of topics and themes that he covers, for one thing. And if we go with just the cinematic and financial successes, Miyazaki blows him out of the water, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view. Starting out in the 1960s as Toei's animation as an in-between artist, that means he was drawing the in-between motion stop scenes between primary scenes. Miyazaki would work on Doggy March, Gulliver's Travels Beyond the Moon, Puss in Boots, and Animal Treasure Island while working his way up to key animator and collaborator with mentor director Isao Takahata before entering the directorial arena himself as the co-director of Lupin III Part 1 alongside Takahata. His solo directorial debut was, of course, The Castle of Cagliostro from 1979, which also featured Lupin III as the lead character. His next major film was based off the manga series, which he also wrote and drew, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind from 1984. From there, he would move on to form Studio Ghibli, which is basically the powerhouse studio, animation studio of Japan for the last, 40 years, and direct produced some of the biggest films in important animated cinema in the history of our film. This includes films such as Castle in the Sky, My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, Ponyo, and The Wind Rises. Mononoke being the first animated film ever to win a Japan Academy Prize for Picture of the Year. It was also briefly became the highest grossing film in Japan following its release in 1997, and eventually held the Japanese box office record for domestic films for 4 years until 2001's Spirited Away came along. Miyazaki writes and presents strong young women characters as his leads, often with a thematic point of pacifism and that society needs to respect its relationship with nature if we intend to continue to survive as a species. He often presents the wholesomeness of natural and traditional patterns of living, the importance of art and craftsmanship, and the difficulty of maintaining a pacifist ethic and lifestyle in an ever-increasingly violent world. His characters often have a moral ambiguity to them, making them more realistic, believable, and relatable as characters. Even more so than a lot of the live action films, because, well, let's face it, most screenwriters write these characters in a very 1 to 2 dimensional way. And they don't have the moral ambiguity. They don't do the things that contradict one another. Within the context of a film, you might see it more over the span of several films if there's a sequel or whatever, or you see it in TV series, but not in theater films as a general rule. We already talked about most of these notable works. We mentioned them all, but Spirited Away won the Academy Award. That's the American Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. It is the only hand-drawn and non-English film to win this award. That's saying something right there too. I have two favorites. I could not pick between Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away for that reason. So John had to break it with Princess. So go ahead and talk about Princess.
Well, what the way I first heard about Princess is it actually got a theatrical release here in Columbia at the old Nickelodeon theater, and like around here, especially back then, like anime films never played theatrically here.
Mm-hmm.
And although I didn't get to see it in the theater, I saw it on video soon afterward, and it just blew me away. The animation was drop dead gorgeous, still is.
Yep.
And that's another film I wouldn't mind owning a cell for, although it'd be very expensive.
Depends on the cell. Anyway, after the late 80s, early 90s, when Disney got into CG, that's computer generated, not Comicsgate, Toy Story animation, Miyazaki created the best animated films on the planet, all hand-drawn cells as well. I don't know. That's interesting. Yeah, I think between Bluth and Miyazaki, both in the late 80s and in the early 90s, were into that. But yeah, I definitely think there's that as well. So, the first thing I thought of was Princess Mononoke, but when I was doing the research on these, I remembered Spirited Away after I remembered that it won the award, and I was like, oh damn. Which one's the better film? Let me think about this. Because I really did love Spirited Away as the film for what it was as well. So I mean, whereas Princess is so much about the connection with nature Spirit Away is so much about family and relationships and finding your not just your place in the world, but finding that level of family that means something to you and you mean something to them and stuff. So it's just, yeah, we've already talked about Miyazaki in the past on this show. We talked about it, both Princess Mononoke and Spirit Away as films indirectly. Both of them got 5 stars. How could they not? So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know which one I love more. You know? Good choice. Well, thank you. Alrighty. Our next director is one that we both agreed on. Kind of a gimme. Yeah, if you don't mention him as one of the top directors in the world, what are you thinking? And that is Steven Spielberg.
Yep. You want me to take this one?
Yep.
Probably the most obvious choice in the history of this show. There's probably not anybody in the history of modern cinema, as in the past 50 years, who is more important as a director or producer. Though arguably his impact is greater in the latter role. I would say they're both of equal importance, personally, I think. But anyway.
The reason I say that is because he's only directed 58 films. He's produced almost 200. So
I didn't realize it was that many.
Yeah.
As you say in the next sentence here. Having directed 58 films and produced nearly 200, some of them being cinema's most beloved films, we could list movies from now until the end of the year, and it'll be just one more awesome film to the next. But I picked a rather obscure film from Spielberg's pre-fame days, which we'll talk about in a moment. But there are way too many significant films to list, so forgive me if I don't mention your favorite Spielberg-directed movie. But if we go by the cultural notice, then the big films are Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, The Color Purple, Hook, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Amistad.
There's more.
I know. Saving Private Ryan, AI, Artificial Intelligence.
The reason I mentioned that one, even though it's not really a Spielberg film, it's actually a Stanley Kubrick film.
Yep.
But Kubrick died before it could get made, and Spielberg actually directed it from Kubrick's notes. So it's actually Spielberg directing it, a Kubrick film. So I thought that might be of notice to mention, since we mentioned Kubrick as well in the list.
And Lincoln.
My personal favorite is Close Encounters from '77, though I do have a soft spot for Raiders of the Lost Ark. The reason I did not pick Raiders of the Lost Ark is because of the trilogy, and I do not like the additional films afterwards nearly as well. If it had just been Raiders of the Lost Ark by itself, then that probably would win. Most Spielberg fans would probably tend to cite Jaws. I can tend to understand why that would be their choice, but I've always felt like certain characters in that movie were too damn stupid in their behavior, and that the story should have never gone down the way it does. But that's not a fault of Spielberg. That's the fault of Peter Benchley's story and script. But John's favorite film is The Sugarland Express from 1974. Now, my guess is that's because it's based on the real-life events that happened in Sugarland, Texas in '69. But, John, you have the floor. What do you have to say for yourself?
And first of all, I'd be curious to know how many people, watching either in the chat now or who will watch later, have actually heard of the Sugarland Express, let alone actually seen it. It's a film that very rarely, it seems, gets talked about. It was Steven Spielberg's debut theatrical film. Of course, he got his start in television with Night Gallery and
Duel.
with that and Duel. Um, and of course, Duel was the first thing that really put him on the map. And then he got the chance to direct this film. And this film was produced by Richard Zanuck and David Brown, who were also the producers of Jaws, and they were sufficiently impressed with Spielberg on this film to give him Jaws. But this is one I keep coming back to, and again, it's his first film, and what I find interesting about it is a lot of Spielberg's hallmarks are already there in his first film.
Mm-hmm.
For one thing, one of Spielberg's one theme that pops up in a lot of Spielberg's films is the broken or the dysfunctional family, and which is present here because it's
very present.
For those who don't know, it's a story of a young.
Yeah, Pop hasn't seen it.
It's the story of a young Texas couple, Clovis Poplin, played by William Atherton, and Lou Jean Poplin, played by Goldie Hawn. And Goldie Hawn finds out they both have records for minor felonies. In fact, Clovis is, when the film starts, he's currently serving a sentence. And Lou Jean gets word that they're going to take their infant son away from them. And she decides she's not going to have any of that. So she goes to the pre-release center and basically tells her husband that he will be helping her get their son back. And I won't go into details, but they literally walk out of the pre-release center, steal a car, hijack a policeman, and just things just snowball from there, which is all I'll say. But you've got the broken family, which is a theme that recurs in a lot of Spielberg's work. Also, you can see in this first film that he was technically innovative. The Panavision company that makes cameras and lenses, they chose this film to introduce their lightweight Panaflex camera, which has been in widespread use ever since. And Spielberg really went to town in the service of the story, but he pulls off some amazing shots like he does. And a lot of this movie involves interplay between cars, and he does, and he's able to pull off a lot of great shots. But one thing, and also it should be mentioned, this was his first film with composer John Williams. And of course, they've gone on to have one of the most successful partnerships in film history. But what really gets me about this, and what really makes it stand out from his earlier work, or his earlier theatrical work anyway, is that it's really a downbeat movie. I mean, yes, it has funny moments, but it's that it's a story that's not going to end well for somebody. And it's kind of got this pessimistic tone. And I think a lot of people, I think the conventional wisdom on Spielberg is that, he started making with thrill rides and, stories for the kid and all of us, and only later did he mature into Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan, but here in his first film, it's like he's got
a very dark story, really.
Dark story.
Yeah.
Yep.
And again, it doesn't end well as far as what happens for the characters. But that we can also say that about the film before Sugarland Express, which was Duel. Of course, that was his first major film, which was actually released, you said, in Europe, but not in the States.
It was a TV movie of the week in America, and then in Europe, it was released theatrically,
and it did do well in Europe. So, yeah. So, and of course, that is a much darker film than even Sugarland Express, because that's basically, well, a horror film with a guy being chased by a truck driver that you never get to see. What's going on? So that was quite a film too. But
and this, I will also say, the Sugarland Express has one of my absolute favorite scenes in all of Spielberg's movies, which is really saying a lot, because there are tons of great scenes. But so it's again, this Texas couple, they're on the run, and they amass a very sizable entourage of police and people chasing after them, and they really gain instant celebrity, and they pass through all these towns where people are cheering them on. And in fact, I've heard Spielberg say that the real villains in this movie are the people who actually encourage them and allow them to think that what they're doing is going to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a scene, like their one moment of rest in the whole movie comes when they take refuge in a mobile home on a used car lot at night. And it's the only time where they can relax, and they just happen to be near a drive-in theater.
Mm-hmm.
and it's showing a Roadrunner cartoon on the screen, but of course they don't have sound for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Clovis, he says, well, I'll do the sound effects, and he starts, ad-libbing sound effects for the film, and
mm-hmm.
you can see his expression as the cartoon is mirrored in the window of the trailer home, and as Wile E. Coyote, falls down the cliff, you can see his expression change from laughter to fear, and that's the first time he realizes that one of them is going to end up like Wile E. Coyote, and it gives me chills. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I kind of, the film could and should have been even darker than it was. The historical accuracy of this film, because it's based on real life, is not entirely there. In the real events that took place, the husband was not broken out of prison. He had already been released 2 weeks earlier when they find this out, and they do what they do instead. And unlike in the film, he gets killed instantly when he was shot at the parents' house near Wheeler, Texas, where they had gone to visit the wife's other two children born from a previous marriage, which kind of tells you something. Why are they living with her parents? Because she's really an unfit mother. But she was sentenced to serve 5 years in prison, but she only ended up serving 5 months and was released, which was partly due to the celebrity situation of what happened, because it was a huge event in real life as well. And they there was enough people that spoke about it on her behalf that she only ended up serving 5 months. And I don't know if she ever really got to be back with her kids or not in real life, but it was kind of a messed up situation. And she died in the early 90s. So I don't know about this film. I mean, I understand why you like it. There's a lot of, you're talking about cinematic touchstones. There's a lot of visual shots, the Sugarland Express, that you will see him repeat back in subsequent films. Certain camera pan shots, certain things like the side view, rear view mirror on vehicles, where you see the camera shooting into the mirror, so you can see what's behind them. That's been repeated in Raiders. It was repeated in Jurassic Park. It was all those things that we've seen actually goes back to this film, even more so than Duel. So, in that regard, when you were saying the films, all the touchstones of a lot of his structures in film were in this film as his first film major theatrical release, is true. So I think it's a significant film to his career, because it shows you that he really didn't know his game from the start. He didn't have to learn it as he went along. He was already there at the top, in terms of cinematography and what he was visualizing. But story-wise, it could be because I'm just not a big Goldie Hawn fan. I just never really cared for this film. But no, like I said, conversely, since my choice is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I think that a lot of people could criticize my choice because it's a very slow build film, and it's kind of fractured between different plots with different people reacting to the alien encounters. So I don't know. It's certainly not the direct feel-good type films like Raiders or E.T. So I think there's that. Let's see. North Free said E.T. was the biggest thing in the world in the early 1980s. Strangely, it doesn't seem to be a movie that has a fan base anymore. I don't know about that. I think it has a fan base, but I think since E.T. is standalone and so many of the other Spielberg/Lucas films are trilogies and stuff, I think it gets lost in the shuffle comparatively to Indiana Jones and to Star Wars and other type movies of that nature. Also, I don't know. I think if there was ever a sequel to it, where we actually got to see maybe the aliens' home world, or see them come back to Earth later on, or whatever. But that would be my thing there. Goonies, yeah, Goonies is there. I'm trying to remember. The thing is, it's not directed by Spielberg. He wrote the story, but Richard Donner directed that. So, certainly a good film, but all he did was write the story. The screenplay was by Chris Columbus, and it was produced and directed by Richard Donner. So that's why that one isn't really one of our choices on that one. But certainly a good movie. Okay, next film.
And I will say before we leave Spielberg, he's got a new movie coming up called The Fabelmans, which I am so excited to see.
Okay. Well, it's John's turn again.
Billy Wilder, June 22nd, 1906 to March 27th, 2002. Wilder's career in Hollywood spanned 5 decades, and he is regarded as one of the most brilliant and versatile filmmakers of classic Hollywood cinema. He was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Director 8 times, winning twice, and a Screenplay Academy Award 13 times, winning 3 times. Living in Austria-Hungary, now Poland, he saw the rise of the Nazi Party in the 1930s and fled to Paris, and eventually came to America and Hollywood as a screenwriter. His diverse range of genre and his willingness to challenge the norms of the era and force the film industry to expand their definitions of acceptable subject matter, which brought him under much scrutiny in the 1950s and 1960s, marks him as one of the most influential directors of the 20th century. In total, he directed 14 different actors in Oscar-nominated performances. Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity, Ray Milland in The Lost Weekend, William Holden in Sunset Boulevard and Stalag 17, Gloria Swanson, Eric von Stroheim, and Nancy Olson in Sunset Boulevard, Robert Strauss in Stalag 17, Audrey Hepburn in Sabrina, Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester in Witness for the Prosecution.
And that's an important thing because everybody thinks of Elsa Lanchester strictly as the Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And she actually got an Oscar nomination for her performance in that film. That tells you how talented a director Wilder was.
Yep.
Continue.
Jack Lemmon in Some Like It Hot in The Apartment.
Jack Krushkin.
Yes, sorry. I was partially blocked there. In The Apartment. Shirley MacLaine in The Apartment, and Irma La Douce and Walter Matthau in The Fortune Cookie. No other director has featured that many Oscar-nominated actors' performances. And why I chose Billy Wilder is like, I think he, as much as any other director, really, I guess you would say, worked both sides of the street in that he made like gut-busting funny films like The 7-Year Itch, Some Like It Hot, which is a classic, and The Fortune Cookie, which I've got back there somewhere. And then he makes like the most hard-hitting dramas, Double Indemnity, The Lost Weekend, Sunset Boulevard, Ace in the Hole, Stalag, and
right.
And then The Apartment, I feel like is a nice blend of the two.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, well, I agree with you. He has one of those few directors that has that kind of range to go from not only comedic to serious, but from genre to genre. There's few directors in the film industry that can really do that. Again, his notable films are Double Indemnity from 1944, Lost Weekend from 1945, Sunset Boulevard from 1950, Stalag 17 from 1953, Sabrina from 1954 to 7-Year Itch in 1955, Some Like It Hot in 1959, and The Apartment in 1960. Your favorite is Sunset Boulevard, and pretty much everybody in that film got nominated for something. So, I mean, that's obviously one of the best films of his career.
One thing first of all, I just think it's like one of the great all-time films. It's one of those films like, if I turn it on, I can't turn it off until the end. Like I have to watch it all the way through. And of course it's got some famous lines, I am big, it's the pictures that got small, and all right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up. But what's really fascinating is when you read the behind the scenes of the making of the film and you understand just how well Billy Wilder blended fact and fiction in that movie.
Right. I happen to be more of a Stalag 17. Um, I think it's a more personal film for him because of the whole situation with his being, Jewish and leaving Hungary Poland for France and then later for America to get away from the Nazi Party and what was going on in the era at that time. And it's kind of like we covered a film with Paul Newman called Cool Hand Luke.
Yep.
Which is one of his better performances in his career. I always felt that Cool Hand Luke was, even though it was based on something that happened in real life and stuff like that, I always felt Stalag 17 was a precursor and an influence on Cool Hand. Do you see what I'm talking about there, John?
Yes.
Okay. He's trying to read the screen there. That's why I got up close there and typing. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I picked Stalag was because the performance in that film, it's particularly of Holden. I just see it. I just see him as the same, not the same character as what Cool Hand Luke is, but very similar. And it has good humor to it, but it also has a lot of I don't know. Drama is the right word, I guess, but it's just a really interesting dynamic because you don't know which one of them is the informant, and, who's suspected of what and stuff. So I really enjoyed that film more so than Sunset Boulevard is a really good film. It's just I don't know what it is about that film. Like you say, it has a lot of classic lines, but the characters just aren't as likable to me, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But I certainly understand why you picked that one. So. Well, there's talk going on in the chat. I'm not going to share it, but yeah. They're just going to pick on me for picking that film to cover. That's all right. Okay. Our next is another one of John's choices.
Yes. Robert Wise, September 1914 to September 2005. Winner of the Academy. I'm sorry?
He just turned 91 when he passed away.
Yep. Winner of the Academy Award for Best Director and Best Picture for his musical films West Side Story and The Sound of Music. Wise was one of the most versatile directors of his era, jumping from genre to genre and making classics in every market. Starting as a last-second replacement co-director for Gunther von Fritsch on Curse of the Cat People.
Which we talked about.
We did. Well, you talked about it more than I did, but yes. Wise went on to direct horror classics such as The Body Snatcher with Boris Karloff and The Haunting and Audrey Rose, science fiction classics such as The Day the Earth Stood Still, The Andromeda Strain, and Star Trek The Motion Picture, Western films such as Blood on the Moon, Two Flags West, and Tribute to a Bad Man, in addition to his award-winning musicals mentioned earlier. Profoundly underrated, Wise is largely looked at as a director who was more interested in sticking to his budgets and being frugal and being a great editor. He started out in film editing, and he carried over this habit of editing in his head. He shot very, very little additional footage from what I've heard. Unlike somebody like Stanley Kubrick, who shot so many takes and miles.
Exact opposite of Kubrick.
Um, Wise would perhaps become more known for his activism in the industry as president of the Directors Guild of America from 1971 to
75,
and the president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences from 1985 through 88. Wise's meticulous preparation may have been largely motivated by studio budget constraints, but he advanced the movie-making art. He received the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award in 1988. So your favorite is The Day the Earth Stood Still. My favorite is The Haunting. You want me to go first, or you want to go first?
You go ahead and go first.
So, I mean, again, there's so many films I could have picked. I love West Side Story. I love The Sound of Music, but they've both been talked about to death. I will say, though, the original West Side Story, I think, is much better than the Spielberg West Side Story. Fight me.
Spielberg, come on. You didn't need to remake that film. That was a perfect film. You don't need to remake that.
But I also recommend The Sand Pebbles with Steve McQueen. That's a great film. I could have picked. I chose The Haunting because, again, it's one I come back to a lot. And I'm selective about horror films. Although I've seen more in the past few years than I've probably seen in my life. I don't like a lot of blood and gore, and I like my horror films to have some substance behind them, with plot. And what I love about The Haunting is there's not a drop of blood anywhere in the film, but it's one of the creepiest films I've seen. I mean, this is a film you have to watch it with every single light in the room off. It's black and white widescreen photography that utilizes the frame very well. It's camera moves, it's sound effects, it's editing, and it's terrific performances from the cast. And it's one of my favorite horror films.
Pop culture agrees with you. And North agrees with you with Sand Pebbles as well.
Yep.
So, yes, very good choice. I agree. I picked The Earth Stood Still.
Good choice.
And I don't know. I'm more of a sci-fi guy, I guess, in that regard. It also had a very good element because it was made. It was made in '51, right at the beginning of the Cold War, between us and leading into the '60s of Russia, and it kind of, even though the story is based on a short story from the 1940s called "Farewell to the Master" by Harry Bates, it's just a really well done film. So much so that it got selected for preservation in the National Film Registry as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And it's all three because it's a story that tells you enough about where the world was headed and is still heading to this day, unfortunately. And we haven't learned a lesson from that film. And unfortunately, I love that film for some reason. I think it's because it's just the whole. It tells you about our prejudices and and humanity's fear of itself, its self-destructiveness, its untrusting nature between our cultures and one another. And yet here you have this alien who is rising above all that to tell you, hey, if you want to survive and move forward as a race, this is what has to happen, type of thing. So I don't know. I just love that film. So unfortunately, they had to make another remake for that. And it was, well, crap. It completely misses the point of the first film. It makes it into a special effects spectacle, basically. And sure, Keanu Reeves, Jennifer Connelly, pretty people to look at, I guess, but but it completely misses the point. So
the first one was cool. Got a great music score by Bernard Herrmann, and Gort is just cool.
Yeah, you can't really deny that either, like you say. So I kind of just missed the whole thing. So, oh well,
So say it with me: Klaatu Barada Nikto.
And no, we did not plan that. He just said it with me, and I'm like, oh, he's going to say it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is another classic. So, okay, and if I had to pick another one over, or not over, but if I had to pick another one, I would actually pick the Star Trek film, which is kind of probably a surprise, but I just thought Wise did a really brilliant job adapting Alan Dean Foster's story, and it was a real Star Trek film, unlike the other Trek films, which is not to say that Trek 2 or 3 or some of these aren't good films, but Star Trek the Motion Picture is about what Star Trek is, which is exploring the mysteries and first contacts and stuff like that, and not about all the cool battle scenes and all the other Star Wars-y stuff that is what is in most of the other Star Trek films. So I always felt like the first film was actually the best one in that regard.
And I actually heard that literally the last project Robert Wise worked on was the director's cut for that film.
Could be. Okay. And finally, we're going to close off our last one of the day. Originally, I had planned for John Landis, but then as I did research, we came across the point where we learned he did something inexcusable as a director, and it led to the deaths of 3 people, so I had to take him off the list. So I had to come up with a quick replacement, and the first person that came to mind was Robert Zemeckis. Born on May 14th, 1952, still with us. And like Spielberg, Robert Zemeckis is probably as well known, if not more so, for his efforts as a producer than as a director, but he certainly has a murderer's row of films under his belt as a director, including Romancing the Stone from 1984, the Back to the Future trilogy from 1985 to 1990, Who Framed Roger Rabbit in 1988, Contact 1997, Forrest Gump 1994, Castaway from 2000, and The Polar Express from 2004. He is regarded as an innovator in visual effects. His exploration of state-of-the-art special effects include the early use of insertion of computer graphics in the live-action footage in Back to the Future Part 2 and Forrest Gump in 1994. Sorry. I was reading the comments here. You got to get that right, or Necronomicon will alter reality. And, of course, pop culture watch parts of Where Eagles Dare and The Dirty Dozen Day in honor of our vets, which is a good thing to do as well. Anyway, Also, Zemeckis did the insertion of hand-drawn animation into live-action footage in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is not really the first time that's been done. Disney had done it before with Song of the South and other films, but probably not as. There was a jump in the quality of that technique in that film, so we certainly have to acknowledge that. And for pioneering performance capture techniques that were seen in Polar Express and Monster House. Of course, what we're talking about, the performance capture techniques we're talking about is taking computer-generated visuals for computer-generated art characters, but using photo feature captured on a computer of the actual actor giving a performance, and then translating it over to the computer-generated work. Okay, Zemeckis is also a TV producer and director, notably for HBO's Tales from the Crypt from '89 to '96. And again, he would not be on this list if John Landis's reckless behavior on the set of the '83 Twilight Zone movie hadn't happened. I would have put Landis on here, but we'll talk about Landis another day. But when I was reading this, I was finishing up the stuff last night on that, and I just, when I read that, my heart sank. You know what I mean? I had to do a little more research, and not being willing to acknowledge that he was in the wrong, and which he never really did. When his assistant director, stunt people, the pilot of the helicopter, everybody involved told him this was not the thing to be doing, and he overrode them all, ignored them all, and said, "We're doing it my way," and was actually demanding that the helicopter lower and get closer to the situation that led to disaster when it happened. I don't know how he wasn't found criminally culpable, to be honest, but he wasn't, and he was sued, but and stuff. But and it almost ended Landis's career. But again, we'll talk about him another time. Zemeckis, he would be my first honorable mention because of Roger Rabbit, Romancing the Stone, and the Back to the Future trilogy. What do you think about Zemeckis' work overall, John?
For the most part, I liked it. I love Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I love the original Back to the Future. I loved Forrest Gump. When he started getting into motion capture technology, I felt, with the exception of Monster House is a great movie. I watch it every Halloween, but for the most part, like with the Polar Express, and then he did some other motion capture movies as well, and I thought he started to put style over substance too much.
Interesting. Well, with the Polar Express, he was trying. It wasn't just the CGI motion capture. He was trying to capture the art style of the artist from the original children's book.
Right.
And so that kind of was counterintuitive in a way, I think, in some ways, because I think it's Chris Van Allen who does the book. There's a very Norman Rockwell-ish thing going on, but it's also very in terms of computer animation, it doesn't feel as real. And I think that's where it was kind of lost, was he was trying to do too much of the Van Allen and not enough realism in those designs. in that particular film. Whereas with Monster House, everything was more open. I think. I don't think there was a specific artist style that he was going for. So I think there was a much more broader and wider definition of what was allowed in Monster House. I think that's why it's the better, in your opinion, certainly the better film in terms of the CG animation and motion capture effects. I think that Polar Express is the better story, but I can certainly understand why you might feel that there maybe because they were going more towards Van Allen's style of art that it just didn't quite measure up. But both of us actually picked Who Framed Roger Rabbit as our favorite of the films. I would have picked Back to the Future, but I really can't do that because you can't judge one without judging the trilogy. And if you judge a trilogy, it kind of falls flat with the other two films. But if it had been just the first film, that would have been my choice. But Roger Rabbit is also one of those things. Of course, whoops. What year was that? That was 88. Right smack in the middle of that situation with Disney. And Bluth and Amblin and everybody. And this is kind of an interesting film because Disney was behind it, or you tell me. I didn't know that. You got to give me more on that.
It was released by their Touchstone Pictures division, but it really, from what I heard, it had been in development for some time, and of course, what it started out it was very different from what it became, and basically it shifted into high gear because Steven Spielberg said he was interested in it. And I think the very fact that film exists at all is a miracle. Because you had Bob Zemeckis was shooting the live action stuff. The animation was actually supervised by Richard Williams over in London, and then they had a skeleton crew at the Disney Studios in Burbank. So production was literally happening all over the place, and of course they were. Of course, this was really before CGI really took hold. So any props they had to have these robot arms holding the props on camera, which they then had to cover up with the animation. And so it's and then of course this may have been a Disney film, but they were using characters from other studios, so they had to get right.
That's why I went over to Touchstone instead of a Disney.
Yeah, basically. And then of course, then the studios had to realize that this movie was set in 1947, and some of the characters, in 1947 looked differently than they did in 1988. So they had to make the studios understand that we were going on the 40s look of the characters.
Right. Yeah. North Free says that Polar Express looks like a Coca-Cola ad, and the fact is, the Coca-Cola commercials that you're talking about, Van Allen was behind some of the designs for that, so that's why they're similar. So, but anyway, there was actually a lot of. It wasn't digital motion capture because that wasn't really a thing in '88 in the same level as it is now. But some of the early digital motion capture was actually being done in Roger Rabbit as well. So they did a really nice job, and Hoskins really does an amazing job in that film. Um, it when you think about it, it's really a one-man performance in that film because he's always acting opposite stuff that's not there in real life.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you do that? I think he became. I think that is his signature film for him as an actor because of that. But I also think it's one of the most underrated performances in cinematic work. Very few people could have pulled that off, and the ones that could have would have been perceived too comedic in nature. If Robin Williams had played the role, or Jim Carrey had played that role, it'd have been too slapstick.
Yeah.
And Hoskins does slapstick, but he does it so deadpan in that film. Yeah. And I know that Robin Williams could do it, but it wouldn't have been perceived the same because of the nature of his reputation. And I don't think Jim Carrey could have done it at all.
And I think like the plots, it's basically a film noir plot, like
it's
crime drama. Mm-hmm. And so it needed that groundedness that I think Bob Hoskins brought to it.
Mm-hmm. I do. I agree.
Okay. And then Christopher Lloyd was just creepy.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, Lloyd getting in that film, he plays a lot of creepy characters. I mean, if you think about it, Doc Brown's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even more so when he gets, we cannot stress enough the significance of the Back to the Future series. I mean, look at Rick and Morty now. Rick and Morty is basically Doc Brown and Marty. So, it's like, it's kind of funny that they do that. I kind of wonder how much Zemeckis gets paid for that. Is that parody? He probably gets nothing, but he should. Anyway, that pretty much closes up our choices for our favorite directors. Of course, there's so many more out there. Those are just the ones that came to our minds at first, I think. We will talk about John Landis again at some point, I am sure. I couldn't put him as a favorite anymore after I reread about that because I remembered the accident, but I was like 10 when it happened, so I didn't know the details. And then reading up on the details, I just couldn't justify that. North Free says he believes that Roger Rabbit was the first and only time in history where Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse were in a scene together.
Probably so.
That could be. I'm not sure. Yeah, could be. But yeah, it was quite the interesting, lovable film in its own way. It's obviously people just not just like Bob Hoskins. I mean, they obviously loved Kathleen Turner as Jessica Rabbit and stuff. But I mean, quite interesting. I'm trying to think if we both picked. If Roger hadn't been your pick, what would have been?
Probably Forrest Gump.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
As I just think that's a terrific movie.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, Zemeckis made Hank's career because you figure Forrest Gump, and then he was in Castaway, which was Zemeckis, and then Polar Express was Zemeckis, and the only reason he's in Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan is because of Zemeckis and the connection with Zemeckis and Spielberg. So interesting, that would Tom Hanks be the star he is today without Robert Zemeckis? You kind of wonder. But anyway, that's all for now. Next week, we're going to talk about the life and times of one Kevin Conroy, the voice actor who portrayed Batman for so many years and who recently passed away at the age of 66. I don't know if that was yesterday or today he passed, but we're going to talk about him extensively because he's not just the voice of Batman. He did have other significant things go on in his career. So we're going to spend a little bit of a tribute time to him. And then maybe after Thanksgiving, we'll do Westworld. Is that good with you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, folks. If you like this video, or you think others might, please hit the like, share, and subscribe videos, or subscribe buttons, rather, to continue to get content from my channel. As always, I thank you for your time and your support. Social media, Facebook, Lewis.BrightRaven, Twitter, @LewisBrightRaven2. See my artwork at deviantart.com/BrightRaven. You've been watching Quoth the Raven, Lewis BrightRaven, exclusively on YouTube. Questions, comments, suggestions for topics of other episodes, Quoth the Raven LBR72@gmail.com is the address to reach me at. If I don't get back to you in a day or two, try lewisbrightraven@yahoo.com. If you want to reach out to John, it's Gray Figaro, Grey, Fig, Figaro. Is there numbers after that?
No, it's grayfigaro@hotmail.com.
Okay.
And I'm on Facebook too.
Right. So there you go. You can find John Norris just as John Norris on Facebook. And so I think that's all for now. Sorry about that. My yeah, I was in the wrong video, wrong window there. That's why it repeated itself there. But that's all for now. We'll see you next time. Have a great one. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Good night, everyone.